and we would like to thank the Historical Museum for their, and the study group that meets here, of which some of you are members, for your interest in oral history and for encouraging us to get with it and do more days such as this. We want to thank Tom Edmonds, the director, Lynn Egan, who you just heard from, Lori Collins, who I believe was instrumental in helping to set up some of the memorabilia, which we hope you'll take a look at, sort of 50s stuff. Also like to acknowledge Mary Cummings, who's been a huge force for collecting oral history for many years here. She's out there, and she's been a partner with the library in many oral history ventures. So, and thanks to you all for being interested in being here. We're delighted to have 3 guests. We had a few last-minute changes, as you can see by seeing that they're all men up here. This was not our intention, but we're... Okay, and so we'll introduce, from your right, Charlton Halsey, who is who's a member of the 12th generation, descended from Thomas Halsey, who was one of the original settlers of Southampton, originally from north of London by way of Lynn, Massachusetts. Charlton was born at home. I was happy to find someone who was born at home. On Cobb Road, delivered by a physician who many people talk about lovingly, and that was Dr. Halleck. He attended Southampton schools, and then after high school he began farming, and he farmed for well over 50 years. In Watermill, and married, had 2 children, had a very long and distinguished farming career here, and he's going to talk a little bit about that. He was involved on the boards of several farming organizations, including the Long Island Farm Bureau. He moved to Peconic Landing, I believe, in 2004. And so he's been away for 4 years. That's hard to believe, but we're so happy to have him here today. Please welcome Charlton Halsey. Seated next to Charlton Halsey is Richard Spooner, known by many of you, feared by some. No, he wasn't. He's our principal. But Dick and Carol Spooner, who is here in our audience, thank you very much for being here, Carol, too. Dick and Carol were the 5th group, entity to move into Peconic Landing. So he is a real trailblazer. He and Carol moved to Southampton in 1957. So we'll hear a little bit about what it was like not coming from Southampton, but landing here in an era in which that didn't happen too often, in which most people were farmers or small business people, and it was unusual to have new people move to town. I remember when he moved to town because his son showed up in my class, and we thought he was so cute. Okay, so Dick Spooner spent his early years in Floral Park. He taught history and government there before accepting the job as the principal of the Southampton High School, a position he held for over 20 years. He worked for 20 years and he was called back, I believe, twice to fill in various gaps and lend his expertise. And this was, as many of you know, during a time in which the village, the country, saw more than its share of turmoil. So this was an interesting time, I think, must have been, to be the principal of all of the unruliness that was going on. Dick and Carol had 3 children. They lived on Herrick Road, and before departing for Peconic Landing, Dick Spooner was very active in village affairs. He was on the planning board for 9 years. He served 2 terms as trustee and 2 terms as the mayor of Southampton. In addition to civic duties and work, he has been an avid, lifelong lover of fishing. He was a great tennis player. He's been a lover of archaeology. He has an impressive collection, which I saw at Peconic Landing recently, of a lot of artifacts. And he is currently on the chairman of the Buildings and Grounds Committee at Peconic Landing, and they're kind of in-resident landscape consultant. So he is just an all-around great person. Please welcome Dick Spooner. Our last guest is someone who I have only recently had the pleasure of meeting, but it's been a real pleasure. His name is Chet Zelensky, and I really apologize for spelling his name wrong on the flyer. Chet was born in Southampton in 19... Oh, you were born in the house. Oh, that's the house. He was born in 1923, and the doctor who delivered him is also someone whose name comes up in a lot of these oral history interviews, and that was Dr. Skank. Dr. Skank, I believe, lived right on the corner of Herrick Road and South Main Street. Chet attended the Windmill Lane School, so maybe we'll hear a little bit about that for his early years until the elementary school was completed in 1935. In 1941, he started work for Agawam Aircraft, which we're going to ask him a little bit about. That was a business started by Albert Loaning, who many of you have heard of, who with his brother Grover were in the business of manufacturing airplanes. Chet, in 1964, Mr. Loaning sold the business to Leroy Grumman, and in 1971, the Sag Harbor operation, where Chet was working, closed down and relocated to Grumman. He worked there for 43 years, and his business also manufactured the handle for the
man that landed on the moon.
for the man that landed on the moon. We'll hear a little bit about that too. That's very fascinating. Chet Zelensky was married to the late Anne Zalewski, and they spent their married life on the street with no name off of Windmill Lane. I bet you never knew anyone who lived there before. He has been an avid and proficient golfer from the age of 8 when he first began caddying at the National Golf Club. We want to hear about that too. That's really interesting. Invited to participate in tournaments there as well as at Shinnecock and National, he has been club champion at the Southampton Golf Club for 13 years. And he's been a member since 1943. Please welcome. All right, so can we begin, please, by talking a little bit about Southampton and the environs and what it looked like physically back then, say in 1950 or so. And I'm going to start with you, Charlton, because of your farming background. Can you describe what it looked like? Talk about the farms, the village, how things were kind of looking in an aerial view back in 1950, say.
Well, seeing that you mentioned an aerial view, my wife had a picture that she gave me for Christmas many years ago. It was taken from the east side of Cobb Road, looking west, and the picture was an aerial photograph of this whole area. And there's only one place, I think there was one little small subdivision just starting to show up. Other than that, you couldn't see anything but potato fields from one end to the other. The village, of course, itself is the main part of the village here was the same as is today, but on the easterly part of the village there was probably 1,000 or 2,000 acres of, probably over 1,000 acres of farm and potato farm right within the village. Southampton Village ended where Wick Park Road goes north and south. On the other side of that, then it was Southampton Town, where the Ford Dunes is today and so forth. But everything this side was the village. And
can you name some of the farming families who were in the village and then?
Well, we start going right down by the hospital where this Gianos just is picked up 60 acres and developed it. There was a family there by the name of Van Brunt. And they owned a piece of about 60 acres of farmland on the south side of the road. Their home was on the north side of Wick Farm Road, but then they owned about another 60 acres on the north side of Wick Farm Road. And then going further east, there was a family by the name of Phillips. I don't think they ever had, they had some farmland, but then going a little further east on the left side, there was a family by the name of Woods. And they had a farm of probably 40 acres. And then still going further east, there was a farm owned by the Downs family. And that eventually was put together into one of the nicest farms in New York State, I would say, or maybe in the country. 200 acres of the flattest, most beautiful land you ever saw. And then going a little further east on the right-hand side, going east from the hospital direction, was the Daniel Halsey Farm, which was operated by them for a good many years. Then my dad ended up farming from 1938 on. We farmed that land, which went all the way from the ocean, almost, back to the Flying Point Cemetery. And then we had some farmland there. And I think that was the only farm families that were within the village itself.
Now, I was surprised to read that you all, or some farmers, rented out quite a bit of farmland to other farmers. Is that correct?
I think it was the other way around. When I was farming?
Right.
No.
Because Henry Krzyzewski, didn't he rent a lot of farmland from you? Or didn't he rent farmland from you?
His son is now, at this present time.
Okay.
But it was the other way around. Most of the farmers didn't, a lot of farmers didn't own all their land. They rented land from other people, families who retired or stopped farming. So it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think so. And what was it about the east end of Long Island that was favorable for farming? Potatoes, for instance, which I guess was by the 50s, was that the primary crop?
Basically, that was the only crop on the South Shore. On the South Shore, mostly all potatoes. In fact, you might say nothing but potatoes. A few people raised cauliflower. A small number of people raised cauliflower or cabbage, but most of the people that raised cauliflower and that type of vegetable were on the North Shore because it was an auction house over there, the Cauliflower Association, and they bought cauliflower. So mostly potatoes, and people planted rye or wheat as a rotation crop.
You asked him a question.
Charles, tell him what you told me on the way over today about the price of potatoes today.
Well, I can't believe it myself, but many times in my farming career, we sold potatoes at 60 cents, 100 pounds of potatoes at one time. And 1 year in every 8, we might get enough to think gee, this is the greatest business in the world to be in. The other 7, he said, what am I doing? But the price of potatoes, question, I have heard that the price of potatoes on Long Island right now is $18 per 50-pound bag, which I can't visualize that. That shows the difference between, that's very unusual.
Are there many places in the country that have such favorable conditions for growing potatoes as we, or why is it a good crop for here?
I think the soil here was as good as any place. It's all glacial moraine, glacial soil, particularly right alongside the beach, the ocean here, some of the best soil in the world, probably. And conditions were good over here on the South Shore because for a long time we didn't have to irrigate. Where on the North Shore of Long Island they had to irrigate because of the dryness, but we would get the moisture out of from the ocean, which helped the plants too.
Okay. Did that change over time? Did you have to irrigate later on, or?
We had to irrigate for one reason, because you couldn't make a living farming unless we increased our yield per acre.
Okay.
In order to survive, you had to get all the bushels of potatoes that you could have. When my dad first started farming, not first, when he was farming, when I started with him, we were probably getting 200, they were talking about bushels then, 200 bushels per acre. which is about 120 hundredweight. When I finished farming, we were getting as much as 400 hundredweight per acre. And it wasn't just irrigation, it was a new varieties of potatoes and new methods.
Does irrigation alter the quality of the potato?
It would improve it probably. It couldn't hurt it.
Charlton, was there a certain camaraderie among the potato farmers, or did you feel that you were in competition with them, or how did that work?
We were all in the same boat together.
Yeah.
And there's many times we weren't making a living. We were just barely making a living or less. And so the farmers tried to work together, and it never really took off successfully. But the farmers did work together. There was one of the farmers in our neighborhood who, in fact, name was Scarlett Squire. All of a sudden, at the time they were planting, we planted potatoes in the spring. About the time we started to plant potatoes, he had appendicitis. And so one Saturday morning, there were about 12 farmers who brought all their machinery up there, and in one day we planted his whole farm. But at the end of the year, he said to us, "I don't think you did us too much of a favor," he said, because the price of potatoes was so poor that he didn't even get his money back.
I think I remember either you or Henry Kraszewski talking about the sort of banter that went on when you delivered your potatoes. There was a dealer or something. How did you dispose of your potatoes?
Well, basically the system worked that the farmer raised his crop of potatoes, the farmer sold them to what we called a dealer. A dealer was the person who bought your potatoes and sent them into the market. And eventually, to survive, the farmers, a lot of the farmers that survived had to get into their own packing operation, which we did. And we got a partnership with the Crawler family, and we packed potatoes together, and we were able to survive and make a fair living.
Right.
But without it, we would never survive.
Right. Your father farmed with horses, is that correct?
My dad was, yeah. My grandfather was too. They had 13 acres, and when my dad decided to go farming, my grandfather loved the carpenter. He said to my father, "You go ahead and farm, I'm going to be a carpenter." And that's what he did. But my dad ended up farming. He loved it.
I was looking through just some notes that I took after talking to Henry and you at one point. And Henry said something that was just so sweet. Henry Kraszewski was such a wonderful man and a wonderful farmer, and we had him a couple of times on our oral history programs, and just I'd like to acknowledge him. And one of the things he said that we wrote down was, one of the things I'd like to add, the way we've changed, it seems back in those days, well, there were so many farmers, as your fields were scattered the same way they are now, which has always been true on Long Island. And when you were dragging the tractor from one field to another, and your neighbor was coming up to the end of the road, rarely that you waved to him and kept going. You would pull over and there wouldn't be a long chat, but you'd still have a chat with this person and then continue on to work, and we'd continue down the road. That was nice. Little.
Well, we had a small farmers co-op here too that we started. Henry was very instrumental. He was the secretary of it, and we bought spray materials together and seed potatoes together and so forth, trying to survive. It helped a little bit, but never perfect.
I also, just one of the other things I remember is that you telling a story, and maybe you want to just quickly tell it, about somebody's comment about changing from horses to tractors. Got rid of did away with the backache and gave yourself...
When we got all the mechanized equipment, it did away with the backache, but it gave us a headache.
That's right.
But my dad started farming with 2 horses and a plow that you walk behind, and he told me he plowed 4 acres in a day's time. When he ended up his farming career, he was driving our air-conditioned tractor at 81 years old, 82 years old.
I also think I remember you or Henry mentioning that really, this is kind of a shame that you felt that farming had sort of started to decline when a generation of farmers died, leaving their heirs really in a tough spot, having to sell off land.
Well, I think a lot of farmers would have continued to farm, but I think it wasn't just the fact that they were making a living, but when the real estate started to go the direction it did, a lot of farmers just saw the handwriting on the wall. They could work the rest of their life with what they sell farm land.
Do you remember it as being a satisfying way to make a living?
I think so. I think that, like you say, there's a lot of camaraderie between all the farmers, and it was a wonderful place to live.
Now, one of the things that sort of started changing when some farmland started being sold, I believe, and town started changing a little bit in the late 50s and 60s, I would say, was kind of a decade of change. But one of those changes was the bypass being put in. I know many of you here were here when that happened. We actually haven't narrowed down the date, but maybe one of you knows the date. But certainly you can remember that happening. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
The bypass. They wanted to put a bypass go past Southampton because it was getting so bad on Sunday nights that they would jam up Main Street. And one day I went down there Sunday night, and there was a police officer directing traffic, directing them out to the highway. So they come up with the idea of building a bypass. And Mayor Cameron, Sr., was our mayor at the time, and he was dead set against it. So you can imagine what would happen if we didn't have that bypass. So they decided to go straight out where the 7-Eleven is. They took out the 2 Roscoe houses and a Sobel house further up on the road because that was a dead-end road. And they moved those houses out and put the bypass, and that made Southampton and helped them out a lot.
It really did help out a lot.
It would have been right there.
Yep.
Why we're dead now where they don't have the highway.
And once they put the highway out there, which we still sometimes call the new highway, I mean, even though obviously it's not new, but then didn't they put in Healy's, the sort of Southampton's first? Do you remember Healy's?
Chicken place. Right up there where Hanky has his strawberry patch.
Right.
That was a takeout thing. It was very popular. Something new around here.
It was the first sort of fast-ish
Yeah.
food that we had, wasn't it?
And I lived on the end of Dale Street, which was a dead-end street in the middle of the bypass. And so I saw that thing grow. And then one of our neighbors made a swap with the village, gave him that piece of land, put some fill for his property up Tower Point. That's opened up Dale Street.
Oh, no.
That's up Dale Street.
That's funny.
It was a dead end, it was a lovely
Was it?
spot. Yeah.
I know we're concentrating on Southampton, but it's so interesting just to get a few details about loaning and Grumman, et cetera, because we always hear this. And can you give us just a little bit of background about that?
Well,
about Albert Loaning
I
and the
can tell
Southampton
you-
connection?
I can tell you about Mr. Loaning. Albert Palmer Loaning, his name was. And he had a brother by the name of Grover. And they were history and aviation. They manufactured planes during the 20s for the United States government at Roosevelt Field. And also, they were stockholders in Roosevelt Field. And he had working for him, manufacturing planes, the future Grumman gang, which is Mr. Grumman and all his cohorts, big whales like. And it came around 1930, and they decided to sell out. Grover, his brother, was the engineer, and Albert was the finance man. They had tired of working there, but before they sold out, they invented the hydraulic retractable landing gear, which was used on the seaplanes, small sleeve private Grumman planes. And that was a great thing, and they made a bundle on that, so they decided to sell out. They sold out to a plant in Ohio. And Mr. Grumman got a hold of all the other guys and says, we don't want to move out to Ohio. Let's form our own company. So they got together, Mr. Loaning threw in a lot of money, and they opened up in Baldwin Garage in 1930. Remember that, Ron?
And where was that?
Baldwin, Long Island.
Oh, okay.
Small garage, and he became a stockholder and director, and remained there for years. So then they moved to Valley Stream, and then Drummond went to Bethpage. And I'll get back to Mr. Loning. He became retired, so he came to move, and he moved to Southampton. I don't know what year he got here, but he was here. He was mayor of 1938 in a hurricane. And he kept active in Drummond, going to the meetings every year. And in late 1940, as the war was looming with Japan and everybody else, he was walking through the shop one day, and the big production manager who grew up in Southampton says, he called him AP for Albert Palmer. Why don't you open a factory in St. Harbor? You'll get that building on the end of Main Street there, and they'll let you have it for $1 a year. They'll come out of depression, and we'll give you all the work you want. So we opened up the factory on January 2nd, 1941.
Now, where was it exactly?
When you come down from East Hampton, you go down to the wharf, right on the edge there, where all those buildings are now, big tall buildings and all the shops. And he opened up the factory, and being out as a caddy, it was 1941, and we were getting ready to close up the club, and I was looking for a job. So when I'm caddying for him that day, I asked him for a job. He said, sure. I gave him a job, and I went to work on November 10th, 1941, just before Pearl Harbor. And Mr. Loning, we produced planes, parts for Grumman, and had a good business, thriving business. And then, of course, they started the moon program, and Grumman got into that, and they had to have a couple of parts made. When the guy landed on the moon, he was standing straight up like this, and he had two handles. And one handle on the left made him go this way and that way. And we made that from scratch when he landed on the moon. It just felt like that. And the other one, Minneapolis Honeywell manufactured. And that was our, and I handled some of the parts that landed on the moon. That's life.
I bet you had your television on in 1969.
Oh, I was up till 2 o'clock in the morning. So anyway, things went on, and he kept the plant going for his old timers. He didn't have to. He was getting up in age. So he decided to sell it to Grumman. And Grumman became Plant 32, and we kept going like that. And 7 years went by, and he sold it to Grumman himself. He sold the plant to Grumman. And they kept it there for about 7 years. And the only reason they kept it there was because Mr. Loning was still a stockholder. But when he got off the board in April of 1971, they had the chance to close it. They closed the plant down. And I was very fortunate to get transferred to Calverton, where the final assembly and testing was done. And I didn't have the job I had in St. Harbor, but I got a job in the stock room, and I had charge of the F-14 stock room, handled all the parts that built the F-14 plant. And I stayed there till late 1984 and retired.
A well-deserved retirement.
So I worked a total of 43 years down there.
Do you remember much about Mr. Loning? Did you see him frequently?
Yes, and I'll tell you one of the nice things. He was a very lovely man. He used to play golf a lot with Sir Foley, who always Sir Foley. They named Foley Square after his big judge, Sir Court, and he played with him a lot. And I got to know him. He got to know me. That's how I got the job. But one thing about him was he knew I would. As time went on after the war, in my record of playing golf, I got invited to play the national 2 tournaments a year besides Shinnecock. And when they played the invitation tournament, which was a single tournament, played one against one another, he would approach me in August and say, Chester, are you going to the invitation this year? And I said, yes. Well, sign my name to everything you have up there. That was a thrill. He was a real gentleman. He was an asset to Southampton. Did a great job as man. Like I say, he was man 38 the hurricane. And
now, his wife, Sarah.
He had a lovely wife by the name of Sarah Locken, who was a great lady. And of course, one of the stories is that she took the course in college later on in life. And she was a great gal. She was a field ambulance operator during World War I, Mrs. Loney was. And then she went into training retriever dogs, and she was very successful. Labradors.
She was a character. I think she was the oldest graduate of Southampton College. And her mother was Mrs. Larkin, who
Her mother
lived
was Mrs.
next
Larkin.
to us when we were growing up.
Yeah, so a little story to add to that. I visited the Cradle of Aviation this year. I couldn't wait to get there and ask the guide about Loney's. He said, oh, check, they'll have a whole display. So sure enough, we got there after going through all the artifacts. And there was this whole display of Mr. Loney and his brother, people working. And there's one picture in particular that I got a kick out of, because he had these little seaplanes. And he would land on the lake, and where he lived, you know, Mrs. Larkin. And there was a picture of the seaplane right in front of the dock on Lake Agawam. It's in the Cradle of Aviation. I got a big thrill out of it. And then as we continued on, I had another thrill. The guide had me take over about Loney's. And then we got on a little further, and we got to the land. We landed on the moon. So he said, okay, Chet, show them what that handle is. So I had a great day.
That's great.
That was great.
Just to segue back into the caddying.
Oh, then
Now, just tell us a little bit, because you caddied for some people
Well,
there.
I started caddying when I was just old enough to swing a golf club, 8.5 years old, 1933. And as time went on, I got to caddy for a lot of old timers that were champions in the country for the U.S. tournament. I was 2 holes behind Bobby Jones one day. I caddied for Prescott Bush, who was the President Bush's grandfather, Prescott Bush.
What was he like?
Very good. He was senator, and also he was Senator of the United States. He was very nice. Head of the United States Golf Association. And of course, I caddied previously for Mr. Loney, James A. Foley, and he was married to Charles Francis Murphy's daughter, who headed Tammany Hall. And I caddied regular for him, so being that he was so well known, he would bring out distinguished guests. And one of the guests he brought out was Gene Tunney every year. And a great story comes with that, which I love to tell all the time, over the Nationals. The first time he came, there's a hole over the National, the 3rd hole, that's a blind shot to the green. And they have a bell behind it. And to tell the people back when you're off the green, you ring a bell. So we got on the green, and Judge Foley came up, Chester, he says, when he finishes putting, you ring that bell. So unbeknownst to him, he finished the putt, I rang the bell, he dropped the putt and he went like that. So he did it every year. He anticipated, he went along with it. And then one of the things that I missed out on the boat on was Chester Dale played with him. And Chester Dale had one of the greatest art collections around. Fabulous art collection. When he died, he gave it to the Washington Gallery. And I didn't realize it at the time till he passed away, and I could have saw that collection in the house. He lived off South Main Street, First Neck Lane, on the lake. I missed on that. But he brought numerous guests down. He brought the judges from the Supreme Court, and I got to meet, and the doctors and all those high-priced lawyers and everything. So I had a great life with those people, you know. They all got to know me as a private caddy. And that was it.
I just want to ask you,
And then one
we'll
more
put
thing.
this article out on the table afterwards. This is an article that was written, I guess, about 15 years ago
Yeah,
about Chet Zelensky. So, okay. But what were you going to say? Your thing that you were going to say there.
So as time went on, and the war ended, and I joined the golf club during the war in Southampton Golf Club, I think it was 44. And being that it was successful, they had an arrangement there that the previous champions and the runner-up could be invited to their tournaments. So I got invited to a reputation tournament, and then I got invited to play the fall ball with Billy Loughlin, whose father was president. And I was very successful. I won their invitation, 11 total trophies from the National. Tiffany. And then I got invited to Shinnecock because of my reputation. I was very successful and I won 4 times over there. Between Southampton there, I have a beautiful cabin home.
Are Charlton and Dick afraid to play with you at Peconic Landing?
I
Lance,
would
by the
say
way,
I'm 1 year younger than he is, but I never got all the things that he did.
And I'm still enjoying golf and everything else and playing regular. And we had a routing the other day at Greenport, and I had a 79. Still enjoying it.
Let's, why don't we turn now to just talking a little bit about the village.
Oh, yeah.
The village itself.
Changes.
In the 50s, in the late 40s and 50s and then 60s. Let's talk about some of the shops and people and, some of your memories from those decades. Can we?
Why don't Charlie tell about Clovis? He worked
Okay,
there 1 year.
oh yeah, okay.
Characters and Clovis.
Well, when we were, the family, the Corwith Pharmacy was on the corner, right over here, right by where the library was. Rogers Memorial Library was originally. And it was a wonderful place because kids come home from college and kids in high school, we'd all had a chance to work there. Probably was 10 or 15 that was working there. And it was just a great thing. Of course, we did get overpaid, I think, because we got 25 cents an hour and they took Social Security out of it.
That's about the soda fountain.
Yeah.
That's what they do. Tell us the luncheon they had, the luncheon counter.
Yeah, well, we did have a nice old-fashioned soda fountain there, which, as kids starting out, when you worked there, you started out in the kitchen washing Coke glasses, and then gradually you increased till you got up to where you could make sodas and make sandwiches and so forth. But when we were working in the kitchen, we always just loved to have somebody make a mistake out, and they pass it out back, and we get a chance to eat it. So. But it was a beautiful old soda fountain, and there was, actually, this was in tough times, and people were working there, grown men raising a family of 3 or 4 kids, and they were probably getting $20 a week or something or other as for their salary, probably running the soda fountain.
How old was Mac? How long on the fountain?
There was a black man by the name of Mac, and he was kind of a village character.
He was great.
And he did the delivery for, a lot of the delivery to the summer homes for the Corwith Pharmacy. And when I was working there, gosh, he must have been 60 years old, anyhow, 65 probably at least, but he was just a character.
One of the things that sort of came up when we were talking about this is the fact that at the stores in the village, people tended to stay at their jobs for a long time. So you had a whole childhood, or at least I did, of memories of, that person working at Schulman's for 15 years or something. So we've got Corwith, which was on the corner, which is where dance later came there, Corwith. And then we had Schulman's. Does anybody have any Schulman's stories? Or Five and Dime?
I have one. We lived a couple of doors away from him on Eric
yeah,
Road.
yeah.
And one day, chief of police comes to the house, and you have a son, Douglas, yes? He said, well, Mr. Shulman just has a problem with your son. He and one other boy were throwing eggs against his house.
Halloween.
And
It was on Halloween, she said.
I'm not sure it was on Halloween. The nature of the feast.
So you went down and
They had to scrub the
Well,
walls.
I
They
had
had
to go
scrub-
over and eat crow. Didn't taste too well.
but there were 2 women who worked there for years and years. Sissy?
Yes,
Someone else?
yeah. Well, before it was Schumann, it was Schwartz.
Oh, what?
Schwartz had it. And Rose Roscoe worked there, and quite a few guys worked there a long time. Then became Schumann.
I can add something. When we first came to town, there were 2 variety stores, Schumann's and Gould's. And it was just a thing to do. You could go downtown and you'd walk around these stores because they had all kinds of what have you, and meet people that you knew, because almost always you knew everybody that was walking up and down the streets. So it was just a very friendly thing, nice place to just spend a little time.
Yes. What was it like to move to the village and become a part of the community in 1957. Did you feel welcomed into the village and into the life of the village?
Very much so. In fact, I can remember going to the Herrick's, and we needed a sofa or some
Hilda's.
Hilton, right. And so we got the thing home, and my wife didn't like the we had worked to set her up in the setting. And so she went back and mentioned that, and they said, no problem. They come back, they pick it up. We ended up with 3 chairs that they delivered. And they didn't even want us to pay for it. They wanted to give us credit. Every store in this village seems to want to give us credit, from Herrick's to Corvus, you name it. The bank didn't want to give us credit.
Didn't you mention something to me about Mr. Nicolich being friendly to you?
Oh, yes.
Mr. Nicolich?
Mr. Nicholas was very friendly. In fact, somebody told him that we didn't have a dining room table, which we did, with misinformation. So on that following day, we got a big old card table on the front porch. Because it turned out to be from a friend in Watermill, Buddy Burnett.
Some other village places. What about Crutchley's? Let's talk about Crutchley's. Okay, where was it? What was it
Crutchley
like?
Donuts.
My wife could always tell if I was in Crutchley because I'd always have some white. Everything was powdered.
The
They were
Telltale.
fantastic donuts.
And they would send those hearts to college, if their parents would send them to college.
All right, so what was the store like?
Just a great place to go.
Okay, you walked in, it was very bare, wasn't it?
Yes, they sold jams, they sold stuff like that, over extra bread.
Gary Cooper loved their donuts so well that they used to send out 3 or 4 times a year, 4 or 5 dozen of the rings and the donuts themselves.
Yeah, they did
So the
well.
reputation of Southampton really.
And you could smell it.
Yeah.
You don't have to be in the store.
No,
If you walked in there, you'd smell it.
Outdoors, you could smell it.
Mrs. Crutchley was my religious education instructor, and when she walked into our classroom, she smelled.
Yes.
You know. They were nice people. What about Act 4? That was kind of a racy place. It was on at the end of Job's Lane, down near Lily White's, Clyde and Stan's, Act 4. Remember that?
Yeah, great.
They had Dolly Madison ice cream.
Yeah.
We like to go there.
Music.
Yep. And the Park Hotel. Anybody ever go there?
The Park Hotel was originally John Duck.
John Duck.
Was in
During the war.
that same location.
During the war.
They moved from Spion to Joe's Lane, where the Park Hotel is, and they moved up further on now.
Eastport.
Yeah, okay.
So the Park Hotel, was it really a hotel?
Yes.
I know Frankenbach's father-in-law, from.
Okay.
And they had, when I was young, they had a shooting range upstairs there, and we went up there, and they had you shooting 22s. So they had a shooting on the 2nd floor above the Park Hotel. And there was a policeman by the name of Joe Quinlan, who, and I don't think anybody in this place remembers him now, but he was a character too, along with the rest of the village. But anyhow, he was kind of the head of this. It was kind of a little rifle club is what it was. And we'd go up there and shoot rifles.
Gee, that sounds kind of dangerous.
And many nice card games up there too.
Really?
As I remember.
Well, the place they moved into, where they were now, was called the Terrace Inn. by
The Terrace?
Thiel family.
Oh, Terrace.
It was a bar, Thiel's. And just recently, a year ago, some real estate guy, I can't think of his name, he come up with a coin to me, and he said, "Chet, where is this place?" It was, you get a free beer with that coin, Terrace Inn.
No.
And he was so happy that I told him where the Terrace Inn
Oh,
is. That's going way back.
That's fine.
That's
Hey,
what you're-
what about the theater, Glynn's or Garden Theater?
Yeah.
That was a beautiful theater,
Where was it?
right where it is,
Right where it is
right where
now.
it is now.
Renovate.
There was,
But to go way back in history, there was a theater
Yeah, a
on Main
couple of-
Street,
Yeah.
and then just below where the Chevy place was, and then Glenn come along and built a brand new theater.
Okay.
And
So
they
it's the
renovated
movie
it.
theater, is that what you're
Movie
saying?
theater.
Oh.
But they had, it was before the days of, what year was that? Was that before they had a lot of talking movies at that point? Because didn't Mr. Terry play the piano for that theater?
there was a theater right next to Agawam Farm. right
Mary, you know this.
Across from Joe's Lane.
Yeah.
Okay, but I thought a couple of doors down from the current theater was the Garden Theater.
That's right.
Oh,
Is that correct?
Just below it. That's right.
Okay,
Yeah, it became a skating rink, right, a roller skating.
okay. Now, then there was the Cultural Center, which in the 60s anyway, had a little nightclub called the Pink Panther. And they had bowling.
Yeah. Oh, oh,
Talking about the Schrank building?
The Cultural Center.
no.
The,
Legion,
the
Legion.
American.
Oh, the Legion, oh, sure, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Lily White's.
Oh, yeah.
Great school. Thing I liked about Lillywhite's at Christmas time, those families that did a fair amount of business there, they had little cubby hole. And you could go in at any time of the day and buy a Christmas present from one of your children. You didn't have to bring it home, and they put it in the cubby hole.
Well, they wrap it first. They wrap it all up, and you could pick them all up on Christmas Eve. So,
They certainly don't do that now.
Get out of here.
And Mr. Jessup,
There you went.
Al
Al
Jessup,
Jessup, yeah.
Bicycle man.
he fixed everybody's bike.
fixed everybody's bike. Then we had Folk and Folk, Peck and Peck.
Saks.
We had Saks and Elizabeth Arden. How about the Anchorage?
You could probably tell us more about that.
Well,
That was Caladinas, that was called Caladinas.
Soda fountain and the restaurant.
yeah. Oh, the Anchorage was a very popular place when we were in high school. And it was actually where 75 Main is now. But it had these great red vinyl booths, very comfortable.
It was called Caladinas prior to that.
It was called
And
Caladinas.
kids in school, we used to go down there and imagine what we had to pay, 10 cents for a whole lunch, Coke and a cheese sandwich.
Margaret's Rendezvous.
Yeah.
I used to waitress there, so I was partial to Margaret's. Margaret's Rendezvous was
Schrank building.
in the Schrank Building, which right now it's the Italian,
Italian.
what's the place? The Italian restaurant. No, not Emperor, the fancy Italian, St. Andrew.
Lobster Parish.
Well, there was that arcade that went in there, and then in the back was Margaret's, and she had a soda fountain in the front with a curly counter, and then two little tiny dining rooms in the back. And a lot of the local business people, I should say really businessmen mostly, would come there every day like clockwork at whatever, 10 o'clock, and sit and have their coffee.
Was she English? Because
She
I
was
remember
Scotland.
going
She was from Scotland.
She would have a picture of the Queen and I used to always go there too. I don't
She
know.
had great pies, and actually, she gave me a long time ago her recipe, which is so great, which you can find in the cookbook
Pecan pie.
that Jackie and Nina put out. Yep,
Pecan pie.
yep. She never gave her recipe away, and then one day, after a few years, she gave me a little piece of paper, and I still have it, and it said 2 penny. It was Margaret's pecan pie. But I'll tell you the trick. The trick is maple syrup instead of Karo corn syrup. Makes all the difference. Just try it. It's in the library cookbook too. But she was a really nice lady. Very short, red hair, 4'10", used to arrive at 4 in the morning to start making all of her coconut cream pies and all this. And she had kind of a hard life, but she was a nice lady. And then across the street there was a rival, Ann's Luncheonette.
Yeah.
Okay, gosh, we have to keep going. Cotillion parties. Dick, were you?
Yep, it was fantastic.
What were they?
Well, we had them at the, we had them in Riverhead, we had them in
Scotch
the
Mist,
hotel,
Scotch West Inn?
we started there.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
And you had to dress up in tux, thanks
yeah.
goodness I don't have to do it now.
I
And
think,
it was fantastic because beforehand, maybe you would go to a different house for cocktails, and then you'd build on that when you got there. And it was, you danced with different people, and it was great.
may I add
Yes,
something?
you certainly
The
may.
cotillion was started by a group of Southern belles that were brought to Southampton by men who had lived here and met them while they were in the service in World War II. One of whom was Penny's mother. Another one was Lanny Terry. Another one was Lucy Ham. And they, being Southerners, they loved these parties where you get dressed up in formal attire. And they really started the
They had a good
cotillion,
time.
which I understand is still going on.
Really? Oh gosh, we're getting short on time. We have to go to the schools because this was such a tumultuous time. Was it not? Or did you consider it an interesting decade, the 60s? Dick, when you came to be the principal, when you first arrived, or in the late 50s, what were the dress codes like?
I don't think there was a dress code other than what the parents sent their children to school in.
Which
And
would
they
not
think-
have been pants for the girls. No.
That did not have one?
Which would not have included slacks or pants.
No.
No. Or denim. We couldn't wear denim when I was in high school.
We didn't have any regulations about that.
Right. I remember in high school, we had one day, it was Friday, that was dress-up day, and we were allowed to dress up. We were so happy.
Wow.
That was, in the late 50s, early 60s.
You were encouraged to dress up.
I started to dress up.
In
So
in the
what-
60s, we had a dress-up day every other Friday.
That's right.
You were supposed to wear a jacket and tie to school.
Yes.
You were not allowed to wear engineer boots. You were not allowed to wear wide belts.
I remember that.
I remember people getting sent home for that.
So what was it like here when the 60s arrived and,
When I arrived in the school, the thing that amazed me, it seemed to be back, quite frankly, in the Dark Ages. They had inkwells.
we had
Intermediate
inkwells.
school. And wooden floors, and they creaked. And that was when you were after a certain student who you wanted to nail, corner. And the faculty were very much respected, with a few exceptions, naturally. And discipline was great. We had a woman there who was related to Captain Blythe. Her name was Marjorie Blythe. And she certainly had to have some of his characteristics because she cracked the whip. And she had just, all she had to do was look at a kid cross-eyed and they jumped.
I'll vouch for that, because she taught me about 3 years of mathematics.
Yeah.
You didn't come out of there knowing something, you were something wrong with it.
And if you didn't get it during the day, you stayed after school, 4, 5, 6, 7 o'clock, people had told me. That was a little before my time. But it was great.
Do you remember, okay, so when did things start changing? When did the kids start growing their hair and doing all that stuff? Do you remember when the Beatles came on the scene? And
Yeah, the mass media has a tremendous effect on young people, and it did then. The thing, to me, one of the greatest changes was when drugs entered into the situation. And I remember attending a meeting of high school administrators, and we were told, and this was held by somebody from the Suffolk County Police Department, and they said, the year would probably be about 1965, that the drug scene is now on the Nassau Queen border. And they were just telling us to be aware of it. It's marching east, and you can expect it's going to be in Suffolk County probably within 10 years, and sure enough, it was. And the fact that many of our local kids associated with summer people, and they probably first introduced it to some of our local high school students. They were challenging times, and they certainly changed the complex of a high school. And it wasn't strictly in one area. It turned out to be shortly thereafter throughout the entire country, certainly in the New York region.
I would imagine it would have been a hard time to be a principal or a person in authority, like a parent.
But one of the good things that I got out of that meeting was that we better do something locally. So I got the chief of police, a fellow by the name of George Richards, who liked young people. Mrs. Diefenbach, Martha, Portia Flanagan, who was editor of the newspaper, and just that few people. And we ended up that we should do something to dry up the kids after school time. And it ended up, we formed the Southampton Youth Association, which is still in existence, I'm happy to say. And when we initially started, we knew that kids didn't know how to shoot marbles because there weren't many areas and streets to shoot marbles. It was all macadam. They didn't know the game of hide and seek for the most part, or kick the can, or ring a levio. And our thought was we would try to introduce that. And we ended up with 4 local groups in different sections of town. And it really worked. And we opened up the high school. I was able to get the Board of Education to agree with it. And Saturday mornings or afternoons, we would have sewing classes, cooking classes for the girls, it was all on a voluntary basis. We opened up the shops so that kids could come in there and make things. And I'm just delighted to know that it's still in existence.
Yeah, I mean, SYA is really just, without a doubt, just the most worthwhile entity. One of them, I think, that the camps they run in the summer and so forth, that was started back then, and I didn't realize that. So that's wonderful. We're running out of our time here. I'm starting to feel like this should be part 1, and we should continue at another time. But let's just sum it up in about 1 minute, because then we can have a few questions. But we're taking this for Channel 22, and that part we'll finish, and then we'll have a few questions. So what about the two of you? How has it been? I know you're away from Southampton now, but what kind of a community do you think it was to live in for a long time or for your lifetime? Start with you, Chad.
Well, I enjoyed living here. Knew all the people we grew up with. A lot of the Polish people were still around. Went to school and some of them hung around. And it was great living here. Hadn't changed yet, property-wise. I enjoyed living here.
It wasn't for me.
It was time to move because of keeping the house and everything.
Yep.
So I moved to Peconic Landing 2 years ago. Very happy out there.
Well, I have to say, we're really happy that you came back to pay us a visit. And Dick, how about you?
I say the thing that I found, this was a very friendly village, particularly with the year-round residents. You could walk down Main Street and you knew 90% of the people on Main Street. And that's a nice feeling. In fact, I think I can still walk down Main Street at this time of the year and people will still acknowledge the fact that I once lived here.
Yeah, okay. We're going to close down this portion, but I want to really thank the 3 of you so much for coming in, and I'd love to have you back sometime. I don't know if you all would agree, but this was just wonderful.